He thought about going back to sleep for another hour or two, but what was the point in that? He would have all of eternity to nap after sunset, so he didn't need to bother with one now. As his eyes landed on his FAL leaning up against the wall next to the bed, he got an idea. Malcom huffed his way up the few flights of steps leading to the rooftop and emptied his backpack of all his rifle magazines and ammo. Including the one in his rifle, he had 7 magazines and 8.5 boxes of 7.62 left. It wasn't a ton, but it was plenty for the party he was about to throw. Scooting up to the ledge, Malcom dropped the muzzle toward the street and looked for a target through his iron sights. He zeroed in on a lone infected and squeezed the trigger. Predictably, his shot had gone wide to the right, shattering the back window of a black Escalade parked on the curb. Between the downward angle and the considerable distance, Malcom hadn't expected to hit the infected man. But because of the booming echo the rifle sent throughout downtown and the Escalade's wailing car alarm, it only took a few minutes for a small group of infected to investigate. Malcom took another shot at a sports car parked a few spaces back, and its alarm also blared wildly from the impact of the heavy round. "Come and get some, motherfuckers!" Malcom shouted from the rooftop. As a good-sized crowd circled the Escalade, Malcom took aim again, this time leveling his sights on the middle of the crowd. His shot rang out furiously, and the crowd temporarily dispersed as 2 bodies dropped to the street. After a moment of confusion over their fallen comrades, the group returned to bashing on the high-end SUV, scratching and clawing to get to the people they thought were inside. A sinister grin spread across Malcolm's face as he repeatedly mashed on the trigger with menacing delight. He quickly lost track of his kill count. The more he killed, the more they flooded in, which was fine by him. He had plenty of hate to go around. If only he had access to an A-10, and knew how to fly one. Brrrt, Malcom heard in his head. After burning through 4 magazines, he could no longer see his kills on the ground. There were so many of the bastards packed onto the streets that the moment one dropped, it was engulfed by more ghouls. Malcom didn't even have to aim anymore. He just swung the barrel in the general direction of the crowd and pulled the trigger. After another 20 rounds, Malcom decided to give himself and the rifle a short break to reload the depleted magazines. Admittedly, Malcom hadn't fully thought out this brilliant plan of his. Blinded with an unbridled desire to slay as many infected as he could, Malcom hadn't considered his exit strategy. The street below his sniper nest was impassable. He certainly wouldn't be leaving that way. After topping off his magazines, Malcom walked to the eastern side of the roof to assess the situation. The roads were buzzing with activity as well, but nothing like the other side. And it looked as if most of the infected were just trying to reach the party on the western side, where Malcom had been delivering copper-jacketed devastation for the past 30 minutes. He scouted out a few possible paths, but the most obvious one would be the skywalk that connected the adjacent office building with the massive office complex across the street from it. If he could manage to get to the skywalk, he was confident he'd be good to go after that. But it remained to be seen just how big that if was going to be. Returning to his perch, Malcom hopped onto the ledge and relieved himself onto the infected below. He didn't suspect the grotesque beasts cared about being splashed with his piss, but Malcom found it humorous and oddly satisfying. The herd had already started thinning after 5 minutes of silence since Malcolm's last shot, giving him reasonable hope that a few hours of quiet would make his departure mildly lackluster. He didn't need to go far, another mile or so, and he was determined to make it, even with the heightened activity on the streets. Slapping a fresh magazine into the weapon, Malcom yanked back on the bolt and let it slam shut. The clacking sound of the Belgium rifle chambering its first round never got old. Of all the guns Malcom owned, nothing quite did it for him like the FN-FAL going hot. And it had a similar effect on him every time his shoulder absorbed the recoil. Doubly so when an infected was on the receiving end of that trigger pull. With less than 100 rounds of 7.62 left, Malcom decided to quit. He sat down and leaned his back up against the ledge of the building, listening to the utter bedlam below. There was a small mountain of brass and empty boxes of ammunition a few feet away from him. He never imagined, in his wildest dreams, that he would be perched on a roof in downtown Cincinnati shooting into a crowd of bodies. That was the kind of horrific headline that made him cringe in the old world. But times had changed, and these weren't people. Not anymore. To hell with them all,